meta-narrative framework. Theistic versus atheistic, yes? Immanent versus transcendent, or religiously speaking, dualistic, weak dualism versus monistic, because we know that Eastern religions, Eastern cultures tend to gravitate toward a monistic understanding of reality versus the so-called Abrahamic cultures, religions tend to speak of a weak dualism where there is an uncreated creator and then there is created reality. Right? So these are very different frameworks and they influence the way you argue. So these are the big the examples of big questions that we want to address. And let me finally, my final point is about the motivation, why we deal with these questions at all. And here I have a few ideas that I would like to share with you. By constantly inventing, replacing, and consuming, a society loses its ties with the spiritual and gains new ties to technology. Personal transcendence tends to be quickly replaced with technological transcendence. Progress, technology, and invention become new humanity's gods, you might say. So it seems that the greatest invention of the 19th century was the idea of invention itself. We have learned how to invent things, and the question of why we invent things receded in importance. Instead, we seem to indulge ourselves with the sweet notion that we find in Aldous Huxley's dystopian novel, The Brave New World, and I wholeheartedly encourage you to watch it. It's very educational, The Brave New World. And the notion, the sweet notion is progress is lovely. Progress is lovely, right? But is technological progress necessarily correlated with the progress in human, lasting, and deeply satisfying happiness? Is technological progress basically the same? Is it a synonym? Or does it have a meaningful correlation to lasting and deeply satisfying happiness? That's a question that we ought to ask. Are technologically advanced societies necessarily happier, more stable, and more sustainable, just by the sheer force of scientific innovation? Can science guarantee happiness, stability, and sustainability as much as it can guarantee a progress in knowledge and innovation? In a letter to George Orwell about his disturbing novel 1984, the American futurist and novelist Aldous Huxley wrote the following, and I quote, and this is in the 19th. He wrote his novel in the 1930s. Yeah. But then he wrote a letter later. That's right. He says this, whether in actual fact the policy of the boot on the face can go on indefinitely seems doubtful. Boot on the face, when somebody squishes you with their foot and you're lying on the ground. So brute force. And he's saying, it's doubtful that the world can go on with this kind of brute force. My own belief is that the ruling oligarchy will find less arduous and wasteful ways of governing and of satisfying its lust for power. And these ways will resemble those which I described in Brave New World. So speaks Huxley. And then he went on to write, and this is very interesting. He says, within the next generation, I believe that the world's rulers will discover that infant conditioning and narco-hypnosis drugs are more efficient as instruments of government than clubs and prisons, and that the lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude as by flogging and kicking them into obedience. Let me read this section again. The lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude. I become slave of my phone, of my technology, and I love it. And I don't notice how enslaved I become. Yeah. So the oppressing power no longer needs to use the clubs and prisons and brute force, because it can use a different technique to enslave people, to bring them into submission. Yeah. Huxley emphasizes conditioning over breeding, nurture versus nature. Human embryos and fetuses are conditioned through a carefully designed regimen of chemicals, such as exposure to hormones and toxins, but also his idea was that thermal exposure, intense heat or intense cold, can somehow influence the development of human nature. Maybe can somehow influence. He believed that this exposure to intense heat or cold can somehow inhibit or stimulate the expressing of some genes within the human genomes, which is probably not true, but that was his conviction back then. And also some other environmental stimuli, although there is an element of selective breeding as well in his theories. In any case, the world in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World has one goal, and that is technological progress. The morals and aspirations of the society are not those of our society today, such as family, love, success in human relationships. No, but instead, these new goals are focused around industry, economy, and technological growth and improvement. The citizens are not concerned with themselves as individuals. They have been conditioned to see the world as a collective and technologically oriented. This society is one which Neil Postman, the author of the book Technopoly, The Surrender of Culture to Technology, would consider a technopoly in Postman words. So Huxley's novel, I think, is dangerously accurate in prophesizing of our future, perhaps. It's a prophecy of technology's capacity to dominate society, and how this domination is silently changing the goals, moralities, and values of our culture, without even us noticing. It goes very slowly, insidiously, and it changes us. The mentality of the society is that progress through invention is the key goal of humankind. Consumerism and productivism are the purposes of life in Huxley's industrial utopia. The engine of technological progress works most efficiently, in fact, when people are conceived of not as children of God, or even as citizens with their rights, inalienable rights, but as consumers. This perspective describes with pinpoint accuracy how Huxley's society functions. The people are no longer oriented to believe in God or some kind of higher binding principles, but instead only believe in the principles of consumption and the inevitability of progress, technological progress. The question before us is, how long before the ever-sharpening claws of technology latch around our own society, our own culture, and grip us away from the morals and the values that we hold so dear, and with which we grew up as humans and as a society? To what ends do we wish to employ the envisioned enhancements of human mental and physical abilities? that transhumanism lays before us as undisputable goals, as unavoidable stages of human evolution, to what ends? We know we can do it. We know science will progress. I'm not against progress. But I'm asking this principal question, to what ends do we mean this? Yeah? What do we want to achieve by this? Have we not forgotten the need to enhance our spiritual and moral vision as well? Have we not confused the means with the ends when we speak of human mental and physical enhancements as synonyms to progress, stability, sustainability, and ultimately happiness? So these are the kinds of questions that I'm interested in, and as not just as a scholar, but as a human being, as a husband, as a father of children who will live in this world and who will see much more technological development, hopefully, than I will see. And so I think on this human level, it concerns all of us, regardless of our scholarly focus and research interest. On the human level, all of us will have to come to terms with this, and we need to find some satisfactory answers to these questions. So if our project about transhumanism can help solve some of these questions or bring some insight, some light, I think we will do a huge service to ourselves, to our community that will gather around this project, but hopefully through the recorded sessions, through the published books or published material, and also through, for example, here at the faculty, I will lead a seminar in apologetics on faith and science, and part of the content of the seminar will be focused on transhumanism. So I will also speak about this in the seminar. So I hope I will get some students this coming year. I don't know how many have chosen it, but hopefully I will have some students. But it's very important that we consult this interculturally. We cannot stay just here in the West or in Slovakia. We need insights from other perspectives, and this is why we need you, and this is why we are so excited to have you here. So thank you again. Yes. Right, so our first session is over.